Making more money in your business is one thing, but what about waking up excited, feeling like there's momentum and purpose? That is a whole other game. So today's guest, Stephanie Hayes, is a business strategist for established entrepreneurs who've already proven that they can make a business work, but now are asking what's next. She works with founders who are feeling stuck, stagnant, or just plain uninspired. They're ready for something more, something that doesn't just create income, but creates wealth, optionality, and a path for a successful exit. Her work is all about helping you zoom out and design a business that supports your life, not the other way around. Because making a certain amount of money is not a real vision, and too many women are building without a clear destination in mind. So, if you've been craving more clarity, more direction, and more purpose in what you're building, this conversation is going to meet you exactly where you are. So, thank you, Stephanie. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Yes, it's so nice to talk to you because I talk to you all the time anyway.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. So, for our listeners, Stephanie and I are in the same mastermind. So, we've known each other for a while and have gotten to have some of these fun conversations. But I'm just always amazed when I talk to you, Stephanie, because you have run so many different businesses and you're always doing all the things, but creating some really amazing results for your clients. So, for our listeners, I always like to start with stories so they can kind of understand where you're coming from and how you got where you are today. So, if you just want to kind of share more about your story, we'll start there.
Well, when I was 5, we're not gonna go back that far. The early part of my career was, all in the technology space and doing technology-focused kind of business consulting and what have you, and working in startups, and I lived through the whole dot-com days and the dot-com era. I think sort of the consistent thing in my career has always been my love for small businesses, startups, like the whole small business ecosystem and entrepreneurial ecosystem, because I've always felt that it's my future and it's also really empowering. And I think that this is where a lot of innovation comes from. I started up my own business with a partner. We built a boutique consulting company and grew that to about 4 million in revenue. And it was all very much focused on technology based consulting in big organizations. But I think that experience really opened my eyes to some of the things that I didn't want and I didn't want to do in my business. And I learned some great lessons. It's kind of like people talk about your starter marriage. That was my starter business. And I took a lot of good information out of that. Business is actually still around. It got sold to another person and very different now. But as I was kind of going along, I got really interested in business model design and looking at a business as more of an ecosystem and a bigger system. And I think that's what a lot of people miss is they get into business sort of on a skill and they just get into business trying to do more of that skill. But as I've learned and worked with small business owners over the years, I realized like having that sort of perspective on your business is really important because otherwise, we sort of trundle along just getting more gigs. And at some point in time, we have to stop and sit back and say, what am I doing here? Like, what am I building? What am I working towards? And when you ask that question, it starts to open up a lot more interesting pathways. And that's the time to start asking, like, what am I working towards and what am I building? And I had this sort of epiphany for myself. I've started a lot of businesses, I've run a lot of businesses, I own a lot of businesses and compared to the average person. and I remember sitting down in Texas a few years ago with a client and just kind of looking at this big wall of things that we had put up on the board and saying, man, I've done a lot of different stuff. Like I've done a lot of different things, but what am I building? And it was just around the time that I was following going through a divorce and kind of losing all my assets and thinking, well, my assets are no longer real estate and like houses and things like that. So what can I build inside my life that's going to have value and that I can really leverage my skills around? And I started getting really interested in the idea of building assets inside of a business and buying and renovating and selling businesses and getting into that whole sort of exit world. And I really like realized that that's the piece that's missing for a lot of my clients is that they are just trying to chase what's next inside their existing business model. And what happens if we actually take a step back and we say, where are we going? Like, where are you going 5 years from now? Do you want to sell your business? Do you want to move yourself out of your business? Do you want to keep going in your business but have a different role? Like, what is that? And nobody gives themselves permission to really think that way. They just think about like the next step and the next step and the next step. And when you do that, you start to build a really different kind of growth path for yourself. And it can be really empowering because I think a lot of people don't realize that they can sell their business. Like there is a marketplace for every different type of business. And so once that became clear to my clients, it started them down a whole other kind of conversation. And they really loved the idea of building something that would have value as opposed to constantly just trying to get more clients. And we get really, really focused on investing in the next marketing strategy. But what if we were actually building something that increases in value that we could sell? Right. So, yeah, that's kind of where I've landed now, working with sort of like early seven-figure business owners to do exactly that with them, figure out how to get them on a path to an exit or get them on a path to exiting themselves out of their business or changing their role inside their business. I also own a software company and I'm starting up a new venture and starting up a private equity fund, which is like very exciting for me and really moving towards my own kind of vision and my own goals. So something going on, Haley, around here.
Yes, always something going on. Well, thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. And one of the points that you brought up kind of made me think of, like you said, I don't think a lot of, at least, a lot of the women probably listening to this have service based businesses. And so many people might not even think that selling their business or having that exit strategy is possible for them. Do you see that when you start working with some of your clients?
Oh, yeah. Nobody even thinks that it's for them. They always think that an exit or a sale is for a VC backed tech bro or whatever, or product based company. But quite honestly, any business can be sold depending on what you do with the business, how intentional you are about building that valuation inside your business. It can be sold for a lot of money. It can be sold for just a little bit more. But like the point is you're building something that increases in value rather than just what a lot of people think that they have to do is just carry on doing what they're doing until they're done and until they're tired or whatever it is. And they just kind of stop. But it's like, no, you've built all these assets inside your business and you can sell off those assets, right? You don't have to sell your whole business. I bought a business, but what I was doing was buying the assets of the business, right? And she kept the entity herself. So there's all these different permutations of what we call an exit, and I wish people were more aware of those because they can craft a vision for themselves that is totally customized to what it is that they want and what they see for themselves. And when they do that, then their work starts to change. They focus on different things and they have something they're working towards. I actually think this whole concept of burnout, we think about it as like, oh, I've been working too hard. I actually think it's more around I've been working too hard on something, I don't really know where it's going. And if I had a plan or if I had a vision or if I had a purpose for what I'm building and something I'm working towards, I think that changes that feeling of burnout. And like if you're, obviously if you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're going to, tire yourself out no matter what you're doing. But I think a lot of people call it burnout, but really what it is they have no alignment and they're just not, they don't know what they're working towards and they feel like they're just treading water.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that you put it that way because I haven't heard that before, but it makes so much sense. And a lot of what I see, like when I'm helping my women with, is go from, kind of like you said in the beginning, they're just client after client after client. They're doing all the one on one work. So now we're switching to that group program. But what I help them with is the messaging around it. But I always start with, what's your bigger vision, right? Because we want to design it around a way that allows you to show up in the way you want to show up and the way your clients want to be served. But I think it goes a lot deeper in what you're talking about. And kind of what we mentioned in the beginning is building for wealth and for your life and not just the cash flow. For someone that's used to kind of thinking about that in those monthly revenue goals or just kind of keep doing what they're doing, how do you frame it differently for them? Or how do you get someone to see it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a yes and thing, right? Like it's not like I'm going, oh, stop making money or don't think about revenue or income. Of course, we're going to think about revenue income. But when you start to put yourself in the head of a of like a buyer, of somebody who would buy a business or the assets of a business, it starts to change what you focus on because right now we're just like, what's the next client? And everybody wants to spend money on marketing because they think it's the thing that's going to get them closer to income. And that's not always true. It really isn't. And I see so many people waste so much money on trying to implement someone else's systems and what have you. But what if instead you did the work to figure out like what's an asset inside your business that you have already that you could build out and turn into something that's going to be profitable for you? What if we were like I've seen it do is just change the whole feeling that someone has about their business and what they're working on, and they like that, right? They feel like, yes, I'm going to keep getting clients, but I'm also over here going to invest in this thing that I'm building that's going to either earn me some revenue or it's going to be something I sell off to somebody at some point in time or whatever. It just gives them a new life inside their business. And I think it also helps them figure out what their role inside their business needs to be. And I that's what I'm finding with a lot of these guys is like they need to reevaluate what their role is inside their business. And that's why they're unhappy. That's why they're not, you get somebody who's a raging creative and has built a business around that creativity and all they're doing is being like anchored by operational stuff and managing a team and everything like that. If you take them out of that role and you give them this newfound capability to go and do what they're so aligned to do, that's going to be good for the business, right? Like that's good for the business. That's going to drive new people. It's going to, it's going to be so in alignment with you. So I just think there's a lot of good that comes out of looking at your business in a slightly different way and makes you feel a lot less exhausted for sure.
Yes, definitely. Can you maybe give an example for our listeners going back to, you know, not always focusing on using somebody else's system and implementing that and going to the next client? Because I talk about that too, as well, of like, well, just because something worked for this expert that says, oh my gosh, I made $11 million just by implementing this evergreen funnel, right? It doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So we're building instead a system that works for you. But what you're also talking about is how can you look at the assets that you have or take what you already have inside of your business? Can you walk us through an example of maybe what that looks like for someone?
Yeah, there's a couple of really good things that you said there, and I will till I'm dead on the ground. I will rail against this celebrity coach, go buy my system like 98% of the time. It doesn't work. It does not work for people because they don't have the same conditions that the person who designed the system has. They don't have the same audience. They're not the same person. They don't have the same energy. They don't have the same offering. And people get so starry eyed about it. They don't want the risk associated with having to figure this out themselves. And so they try to hire, and they get sold on the idea by a great copywriter that this is a thing that they need and they get disappointed. Then they start to think to themselves that they're just not good at this. It's so damaging. Anyway, get off my soapbox around that. But a great example of someone building assets inside their business. So I had a client who she had an agency and like digital marketing for B2B software company, like tech companies. She had written all of these SOPs and designed all these systems and processes inside her own business to be able to facilitate her agency. And to me, that's an asset, right? That's an asset you've created. And it was really aligned with sort of, it came out of her because that's what she likes to do. And that's what she's really good at doing. And so we talked about packaging up all of that work and selling it to other agency owners, right? And that's what she did. And she was able to sell this package for like 4 or 5 grand or something a pop. And then starting to build a brand around herself as an expert in sort of agency operations. So that was an example of taking something she'd already created inside her business and making it valuable. There are other things that are more sort of less revenue focused and longer term focused. I have a client who realized that he could take some of the work he had done with his clients that were like repetitively and turn it into a software product. He's an engineer and he's building a product that's very specific to a like a niche market. And that software product now becomes an asset that he's going to one day be able to sell to his clients from a licensing perspective. And that's highly leveraged, right? Whereas all his work up until then was like getting paid for his time, right? So he's also building productized services. He's now expanding into a, building a team around him. So all of that shift in thinking for him, he would have, he's not a business person, and he would have just adopted the traditional engineering firm model where everybody just gets paid for their time. And now he's, over the years, been building all of these different assets inside his business and productizing his services, and finding a team and creating a team around the things that he could repeat inside the business. So he's really taken the concept and kind of run with it and given himself time back, given himself a much more enjoyable business to run, and given himself something that's going to grow over time and become valuable at some point.
Mm, I love that. That's got my wheels spinning as well. Because a lot of what I do is it's really focused on the specific client that I'm serving and what does their business look like, right? How they want to show up. But I'm still using a lot of the same frameworks or some of the same rules and structures and my processes. And so it's just something like that where turning it into an asset or turning it into a product that I haven't really thought of in that way. Yes, I have like my template shop and all the things my people get inside of the group, but thinking of it on bigger scale. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. It gets like when you really start to ignite that thinking and you get really creative about it, like you can come up with some pretty interesting ideas and some pretty interesting concepts, but it's getting into that mindset. And my folks who have been in this with me for a few years now, like that's the only way they think about their business now, is anything new, they think about it in the context of how does this become an asset inside my business.
yes. And I know one thing when we were talking before this, you had kind of mentioned that it's really shocking how many business owners don't have a clear destination beyond this is how much money I want to make.
Totally.
And so, why do you think that's so common? And what are maybe, even if that's happening to our listeners, what are some first steps that they can take to start creating that bigger vision that actually really excites them?
Yeah, I think this is really simple, Haley. I think it's just a matter of like, most people started up a business not because they were a business person, but because they just really wanted the autonomy and they wanted to find a way to, use their skills to create something on their own. And in order to be able to think this way and see this, you have to be immersed in the idea of business and have the experience. And so I think they just simply don't know what's possible for them. And they have never been sort of encouraged to think that way because they can't see the path, right? Um, there's a book that I read called 10x is easier than 2x. And honestly, like, it's not like an amazing read, but the idea, the thinking behind it, once you get sort of the concept, it really starts to shift how you think about everything that you're planning on doing. And the idea is like, if I were to think really like in really wild terms about my business and I was to 10x my revenue, what would I be doing differently? Like, it's very rarely that I would just be doing more of the same thing. I would have to have very different ideas around how I could grow, and I would have to think about very different strategies. And that's like a really interesting exercise because what it comes down to is, well, why? Not that I necessarily want to 10x my business, but why am I focusing so much on the things that are only going to move me forward in very incremental ways? Like, we get taught that you have to do this thing and you have to do that thing and you've got to have a social media strategy and blah, blah, blah. Like, when I started to think this way about my business, I was like, who cares if I have a social media strategy? Like, that is not the thing that's going to 10x my business. What's going to 10x my business is really, really wildly different strategies around acquisitions or around, something else. And so maybe I'm not going to implement those strategies right away, but I'm certainly going to stop spending all my time on these little piddly incremental things that are baby steps. So I think that thinking is a really important place to start. And asking yourself that question, what is the art of the possible? And what would I do if I had a gun to my head and I had to increase my revenue by 10 times? So it's the muscle that you want to develop in terms of the way that you think about your business. And then maybe you come back to something like, well, what would happen? What would I have to do to double my revenue? And all that's possible, right? It's all possible. But it's about starting the thinking and about giving yourself permission to think big, right? And I think a lot of people don't think that way because they're scared of not achieving it. They're worried that by making a plan, they're not going to get there. And then it just feels like disappointment. Or they often think, well, I'm not a business person. So, I wouldn't know how to do this or whatever. There's all sorts of mindset stuff that gets in the way. But for those people who are listening right now, and I asked you that question. I said, what's going to happen? What's the business going to look like in 5 years? I bet you most people wouldn't be able to answer that question because they haven't been intentional about actually making a plan. And when you make that plan for yourself and you have that vision for yourself, you have a much better chance of actually achieving it than if you just kind of keep doing what you're doing right now and getting frustrated.
Yes, I love that you brought up the 10x is easier than 2x. I read that book and like you said, it just the way of thinking is so important. And I was just chatting. I'm in a little book club with some other business women who wanted to read that book too. And I'm like, I need to go back and actually now implement the things, right? It's one thing to just read the book and get the idea, but I think it's so easy to fall back into our normal habit of what we're used to doing and what we have been doing rather than keeping that 10x thinking as our new way of thinking and being because
Yeah.
it's so radically different that we just default back to what we're always used to doing.
Yeah. It's number one reason people don't make progress is because they fall back into what's safe for them and what they know. And it does take a lot of like, I will say the one thing I have going for me, it's a lot of things I don't, but the one thing I have going for me is that I've never been afraid to try something. And I don't have the fail gene in my body because it just like I've done a lot of things that haven't worked out, that haven't, had the results that I was hoping they would, but it doesn't bother me. Like I just kind of go, okay, that's interesting. What did I learn from that? How can I now use that to keep going forward? But I think so many people are held back by this fear of I'm going to be judged or I won't be able to do it or I'm not going to get the results or what have you. But I guarantee you that just getting into that mindset and thinking about it and trying is going to move you forward in some ways because you're going to have new information about something and then you get to pivot. And that's how business works, right? We go, oh, new piece of information. I'm going to go over here. New piece of information. Going to go over here. It's not like we like what we hear from all these celebrity coaches. Oh, I just made some stories, and then all of a sudden I had a million. Like, come on, that just is so that's not real, right? And you do not have the conditions to replicate that. So just like please just focus on yourself and who you are as an individual and what you can do for yourself, but get into that mindset of thinking like, of course, setting a goal for 10xing your business and not setting goals that are in between that would, make you feel pretty bummed out about not achieving it within a year. But it's the disruptive thinking, it's the new ideas, and it's the acceptance of those new ideas that's so critical to being able to be resilient.
Yes, because like you said, it's a totally different way of thinking. If you were
Totally.
just double your goal, what you would do versus 10x your goal, it would have to be dramatically different. And so I 100% agree, just thinking different. And something else that came to mind when you were talking about that, I don't remember at which point it was, but I was talking to a man who started now a group program and he was used to serving one on one. And now he has sales coming in and filling up membership. And he goes, I'm having a hard time not working so hard for this money that's coming in. So
Yeah.
it's also just like a condition that we're used to. Like we have to work so hard for a certain amount of money. And so even kind of switching that thinking and switching that mindset of like, it doesn't have to be so hard.
No. And the irony, Haley, is that the people who I find to be the most restful clients for me are the ones that pay me a lot more money. And so when you get into that sphere of people who are happy to pay you more, they have far less demands than those who are paying less. So that's the irony of like getting into more leveraged income. I'm the type of person that ends up being like, oh, great, I have all this extra time. Let me now do more work. Let me go find new things to do. But it's enjoyable for me, right? Like I actually really love what I do and I never feel like I was in a contract up until last week where it did feel like it was a real lag, like it was hard to get myself motivated to do the work, but that's gone now. And I think that alignment is so super important. But, for him, it's like, great. What are you going to do with the rest of your time? Because it's there for you. And that's where you have to get back into alignment with your long term vision. I interviewed a guy on our podcast the other day who had done some pretty significant exits and made some good, significant money. And he was like, the one mistake I made was not having a 30-year life plan.
Mhm.
Regardless of the business, regardless of what I'm doing, I needed that life plan. And then I can make all the decisions around my business to make sure that I'm in congruence with my life plan. I'm like, oh, that's the ultimate goal, right? Is what do I want my life to look like and make decisions based on that. So we're kind of talking like let's do the same thing for your business. But yes, the overarching life plan is really also what's going to guide what you want to do with your business as well.
Yes, because I think your business is often what is able to fund that life plan, right?
Often, yeah. If it's
So
not, I wanna, like, let's talk about marriage because I'm
Oh, I love it. So I think that's kind of a perfect segue. I always like to ask my guests, how do you define success in this season of your life? Because I think so often, just like what we've been talking about, we're chasing someone else's version of success a lot of times. And we kind of stop and forget to really define what it looks like for us and how we want to show up. So, what does it look like for you right now?
success for me feels like I'm always growing and that I am serving my clients are feeling served, right? But for me, it's so much about just continuing to move forward and continuing to grow. I'm really, really wired to make progress and feel like every day is making progress in some way or another. So if I don't feel like I'm growing, if I don't feel like I'm constantly evolving, I don't feel very successful.
Mm. Thank you. I always love hearing people's ideas of success and what it means to them because it's so wildly different. And a lot of times we don't actually like think about it and really think about what it means. But I love that. And I think always growing, always learning is so important, especially when you're running a business. So thank you, Stephanie, for being here. If our listeners want to work with you or create this bigger vision, this successful exit plan, where can they find you? How can they get in touch with you? I'll have all your links in the show notes, but I just always like to have you share what's next.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably best way to find me is stephaniehayes.biz, which is also going through its own transition right now. So it might look a lot different in a couple months than it does right now. Or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and our podcast is howtofounder.com. So you can find me on any one of those platforms.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for being here. I will have all of your links in the show notes so people can find you and work with you. And yes, just thank you for always being an incredible human.
Oh, thanks, Haley. Thanks for having me on.